So $6 billion a day is the cost.
Unsustainable. At some point, we're going to run out of other people's money, and the people we're borrowing from, some of our foreign creditors like Japan and China, by the way, will stop loaning us money to pay for an ever-growing government where we have almost $2 trillion in an annual deficit. If you look over 10 years, we're going to add over $20 trillion to the national debt. We're paying over 50 cents on every dollar just to service the debt. That's more than we spend on all of national defense. That cost is almost $1 trillion. That's more than we're spending on Medicare now. So the wheels are coming off the wagon, and we have to have a plan to reduce our spending, stabilize the debt by just growing faster than we're spending and getting back to economic growth.
This would have been a good year to do it because revenue was up 11%.
Yeah, we've seen record revenue, by the way, ever since
corporate revenue up 26%, but spending was up 11%.
Great. There's a great chart on the front of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, look, if we grow 1%,
we've just been outspending every single year.
Yeah, we have. But look, the foundation's always going to be growth. We had over 3% GDP prior to COVID, and if we grow 1% over what CBO projects, the 10-year annual GDP average, which is 2%, paltry 2%, then we will reduce the deficit by $3 trillion. We'll bring the debt.
But let's talk about how do we grow and are we actually going to have a real conversation about cutting? Because I was going to say, in terms of cutting spending, neither candidate on the presidential end of things and very few in the Senate and Congress seem to be talking about cutting anything ever.
Yeah, well, I think there are two myths on each side of the equation politically. One party thinks that you can tax your way out of this deficit hole, and you can't. You'll run out of other people's money, as Margaret Thatcher says, and you'll destroy the economy, quite frankly. That this is the worst time to consider adding taxes on our job creators or our families suffering with the worst and most regressive tax of inflation. At the same time, there's a myth on the Republican side that we can just grow out of this $2 trillion, soon to double in the next 10 years, et cetera, about $130 trillion over the next 30 years. Won't happen. We won't get there if we don't rein in spending.
You can look at,
so we have to combine the cuts.
But nobody wants to have the cut conversation.
No, I do.
If I said to you, where do you cut?
Oh, listen, let's start with unspent billions of dollars of COVID. Let's start with tens of billions in funding for illegal
immigrants. Where is that money,
immigrants.
by the way? So there's, you read these headlines that say there's $200 billion, or all this money from COVID that's been unspent. Where is that money?
Well, it's like the monies we're spending on illegal immigrants. It's housing, it's health care, it's welfare. But
it's spent or it's unspent? People say this is like the COVID money is unspent.
It's appropriated but not spent. And listen, it's just billions, but there are tens of billions in spending. In fact, it's $9,000 per illegal immigrant in fact, CBO just did a report, $16 billion on Medicaid spending. This was just last week for people here illegally. And I could go through a list.
I should say, by the way, I also saw some new data which surprised me, and I don't know what you do about it. The cost of removing illegal aliens from this country could be astronomical as well, which we have not figured out.
They put that in those deficit plans. Why Trump says is worse, but we're not talking. But we're not talking about cutting right now. On the Trump side, no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, no SALT cap anymore. I mean, it's crazy. But on the other side, we're not talking about cutting. Do you know what this new entitlement for home health care would cost if you put it under Medicare? It's $288,000 a year for people to be taken. You add to that $25,000 for down payment on houses, $3,600 child tax credit, $6,000 baby bonus, universal pre-K, and paid family leave. That's not cutting spending. Those are layering all this new spending. I don't know how much that is that I just mentioned.
That's complete new spending, but then there's the other argument on the other side.
I said that, but
not just that. You get tariffs, and then what does that do to the economy, and how much can you collect in taxes? At some point,
we'll ask Ro Khanna this: if we had 26% higher corporate revenues, why do we need to screw with that and go up to 28% on the corporate tax rate?
Well, I think that Trump has a list of things that I would say are a starting point for negotiations.
No, I'm not saying, he wants to go down to 15.
Well, that's right.
But she wants to go up to 28.
So do you think that going to 15 is the right answer? given what you just laid out.
On just domestic.
These are a list of proposals for consideration. What we have to do is keep taxes low, keep our businesses competitive. How that shakes out in terms of any one provision is
I'm
up to
asking you very specifically, because all these are going to be specific. So if I said to you 15%, would you vote in favor of 15%?
I'm more interested in locking in permanent tax breaks for small businesses that will expire next year, like the 20% deduction, the 199A for small businesses, where Kamala Harris and her tax proposal would allow that to expire. And then when she says she's not going to tax anybody making less than $400,000, that's just simply not true. There's 1.5 million businesses that gross, as you know, well over $400,000, but they don't take home $400,000.
If we go to 28, you add in state, that'd be some of the highest in the world.
But yeah, exactly.
I guess what I'm saying is this.
Yeah.
And can you have both ideas in your head, and can you say them publicly? That the Harris plan, as it relates to taxing small businesses, may not be good, and at the same time, 15% may be too low. Can you say that aloud?
Here's what I was
just for companies that manufacture here. But
let me tell you what I can say out loud. We need the lowest rates to have our job creators have the most competitive posture vis-a-vis their competitors.
So would you go to zero?
And we need, by the way, we need the lowest tax rates on our families whose wages have been burned through by inflation.
Would you only do it for companies that do it here? That's like weird corporatism.
Here's the point.
Isn't that industrial policy?
Here's the point. You can keep taxes low,
okay,
but you have to reduce spending commensurately. You have to bring down the structural imbalance in our mandatory spending, which is 75% of the budget. You can't just defer the tax, which is what increased deficits are, a deferred tax on our children.
So my question to you, therefore, is your candidate is former President Trump.
Yes.
Do you believe that there are plans that he has articulated that would bring down, not just grow the economy, but bring down those costs and the spending piece? Are you aware of those? And what are those?
Well, I can tell you that he's talked about this efficiency commission with Elon Musk, and I can assure you that starting with $236 billion in waste and fraud in healthcare and welfare entitlements, there is a
lot of stuff in there. I hope so.
Waste and so this guy's run a business. He understands that you've got to clean up your balance sheet. He knows how much waste is in the federal government. He knows the bloat that was carried over in the bureaucracy from COVID. He knows all the waste in welfare. He knows what incentivizing work will do to save money and get people out of the welfare trap.
I just ask, because he was there during COVID, and some of that bloat happened as a result of programs that he put in place. And in fact, I think if you were to talk to Steve Mnuchin, he would say, we decided that we had to throw everything at it. And we knew that in the moment, there was going to be waste and fraud and all sorts of things. And so here we are now saying that he's the responsible party in all this.
No, I would not say that. You're saying that. What I would tell you
say he's not. Okay.
No.
He's not the responsible party.
Look, there's a big difference in having to spend money in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. I think everybody would say it was unprecedented.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And there was a lot of unknowns when he was at the helm at the beginning of COVID. Fast forward to 2021, the first year of President Biden and Kamala Harris. There was $1 trillion still unspent from all the COVID relief prior to them showing up. $1 trillion. What did they do? They added $2 trillion, most of which was not COVID related. It was blue state bailouts for union pensions, all kinds of progressive pet projects. That is what lit the fuse that ignited the inflationary firestorm. It's very different. You got one president that spent in an unprecedented disaster, one that spent $2 trillion that created an unprecedented disaster.
You demonstrably believe that without that bill, there would have been that inflation would have remained super low.
I think
supply chains have nothing to do with this?
I think the Federal Reserve...
How would you explain that relative to all of the inflation that happened around the world?
Listen, supply chains had some
By the way, I believe, like you, that that bill played a role in inflation. Do I think that was the match that lit the fire? No, I think that empirically the supply chains lit the fire because we saw that happen everywhere else.
If you add the dollars to the supply constraints,
Listen,
the supply constraints were there, and then you throw too many dollars at it. That just
Larry Summers, ask Democrat economists who said the bathtub was overflowing. We flooded the market with federal monies, with stimulus monies. We created a chasm in the imbalance
Larry
in supply
Summers,
and demand.
Jason Furman have all said the same thing.
They've all said the same thing.
But the United States did
Yeah.
have lower inflation than what we saw overseas.
We had low inflation. We had higher wages. We had lower unemployment. We've had 25% increase in unemployment recently. We're at 2% GDP.
But
there's no comparison in the pre-COVID
always
Trump
better.
era and what we're experiencing
well,
today.
we should always lead the world as the United
Are you
States.
surprised, real quick,
Yeah.
are you surprised as to how strong the economy is today? Given the corporate profits that Joe just mentioned?
I don't think it's strong.
You don't?
No.
Even though they had those profits?
The last several months, save and except the last month, and I think there's some problems with the numbers, have shown increase in joblessness. We've had a 25% increase in unemployed people in this country. Anytime we've had that, we've had a recession. And
So you don't believe the jobs numbers we just got?
I think there's a lot of government jobs in there. I think there's a lot of people working 2 jobs in there.
The August numbers were revised higher too, though.
The jobs numbers were revised downward by the Bureau of Labor Statistics by almost 1 million jobs. I think this thing is a lot more fragile than people think, carrying this kind of debt load, coming out of it.
Right.
I don't think the Federal Reserve would have put 50 basis points on their cuts if they weren't concerned about
Final
a potential
question. Are you
recession.
surprised then how the stock market's almost at all-time highs here? Are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised. It's going to fluctuate, but it ended up lower than higher when the Feds cut the interest rates was counterintuitive.
But if it was terrible, you would accept it. Or if it was terrible and people thought it was going to be terrible in the future, you would think that the market should
it's
be
a
lower.
lot better than people predicted. But you know what? Just like the CBO report, it was different than what was predicted. Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's first year, they projected the annual deficit to be $900 billion. It is almost $2 trillion. So it's a lot worse than projected. But yeah, the markets have been more resilient than we anticipated.